Across the galaxy, strange reports were coming in faster than the Galactic Alliance could process them. Trade ships disappeared without distress calls. Mining stations went silent in the middle of their shifts. Exploration vessels found worlds that had been dead for thousands of years, suddenly showing energy readings that made no sense. On the bridge of the starbound Captain Hyunwoo read report after report with growing dread. Each incident seemed small by itself, but together they painted a picture that matched Taemin's warnings. The ancient enemy was stirring in its prison, and its influence was beginning to leak into normal space. Vextar coordinated communications with his forearms working across multiple control panels at once. "Captain," he said, his musical voice tight with stress. "I have Admiral Sung-ho of the 7th Fleet on priority channels. He says 3 of his ships encountered something near the outer rim. Something that should not exist." The holographic image of Admiral Sung-ho appeared above the communications console. The Admiral was a stern-looking alien with silver skin and sharp features. His species, the Valorians, were known for their military discipline, but now he looked shaken. "We lost contact with the patrol ships yesterday. When we found them, they were drifting in space. All life support was working, but the crews were gone." Taemin stepped forward. "What condition were the ships in?" he asked. "Were there signs of battle damage?" "Weapons fire. Hull breaches." Admiral Sung-ho's expression grew more troubled. "No damage at all. The ships were perfect condition, everything was working normally. But when we boarded, we found the crews at their stations. They were alive, but they would not respond to any commands. They just stared ahead with empty eyes." The human warrior's face went pale. "I know what happened to them. The touch of the devourers. Those crews are gone now. They look alive, but inside they are empty. The hunger has taken everything that made them who they were." More reports came in every hour. A research station studying ancient artifacts suddenly began broadcasting signals in a language no one recognized. A merchant convoy found abandoned ships floating in formation as if their crews had simply vanished. A diplomatic mission to a neutral world discovered that everyone on the planet had stopped talking and now just stood motionless in the streets. Taemin studied each report with the eyes of a soldier who had fought this war before. "Ikao, pattern is always the same," he explained to the crew. "The devourers test the strength of their prison by sending small amounts of influence through cracks in the barrier. First they touch a few minds, then more, then entire populations." Nara interfaced with the ship's computers and projected a map of the galaxy showing all the incidents. The pattern was clear. They formed a rough circle around the area that had once been the Sol system, where Earth had made its final sacrifice. The prison was weakening, and the cracks were spreading outward like ripples on water. "We need to warn the Alliance," Hyunwoo said. But even as he said it, he knew how difficult that would be. The galaxy had lived in peace for so long that most species had forgotten how to fight real wars. Their militaries were small forces designed for keeping order, not battling an enemy that could destroy entire civilizations. The first official response came from the Alliance Council. It was polite but dismissive. The council members acknowledged the reports but suggested they were dealing with some kind of natural phenomenon, or perhaps pirates using new technology. The idea of an ancient enemy breaking free from a prison made of a collapsed planet seemed too fantastic to believe. Some worlds began to take the threat seriously. The warrior species like the Krathen started mobilizing their fleets. The Valorians under Admiral Sung-ho began developing new combat protocols. But too many others chose to ignore the warnings. They had lived with peace for so long that they could not imagine anything else. Taemin worked frantically to decode the locations of other human survivors hidden across the galaxy. His people had scattered in sleeper ships like the one he had traveled on, hoping to preserve humanity until it was needed again. But finding those ships after 100,000 years would be nearly impossible without the right coordinates. Each day brought worse news. An entire trade federation went silent. Overnight, a research expedition studying a black hole detected massive ships emerging from the darkness near the galactic rim. An agricultural world reported that their crops were withering despite perfect growing conditions. The most terrifying report came from a deep space observatory that had been monitoring the area around the old Sol system. For the first time in 100,000 years, they detected movement in the collapsed space where Earth's prison held the Devourers. Something vast was stirring in the darkness. Taman stood at the observation window of the Starbound and looked out at the stars that had once been protected by his people's sacrifice. "They look so peaceful," he said to Captain Hyunwoo. "But peace is fragile. My ancestors learned that the hard way. When the darkness comes again, those who are not prepared to fight will become food for the hunger." The human warrior turned to face the alien captain with determination burning in his eyes. "My people left weapons, hidden across the galaxy, tools and knowledge that can fight the Devourers. But we need ships and crews willing to use them. We need soldiers who understand that this war is not about territory or resources. It is about the right of life itself to exist." As if summoned by his words, an emergency alert sounded throughout the ship. Vextar's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, we have received a distress call from the Kepler research station. They report that their personnel are acting strangely, and that something is coming through their deep space scanner readings." Captain Hyunwoo looked at Taman and saw the grim knowledge in the human's eyes. This was it. The scattered incidents were becoming direct attacks. The Devourers were no longer content to influence from a distance. They were beginning to act directly. Taman moved toward the weapons locker with the fluid grace of a born warrior. "Set course for Kepler Station," he said. "We need to see the enemy face to face so the galaxy will understand what it is facing, and we need to start teaching your people how to fight back." The ancient war was beginning again, and this time humanity would not face the darkness alone. But would the lessons learned from 100,000 years of peace be enough to face an enemy that had been waiting in the dark, growing hungry for revenge? Deep in the ancient human ship, Nara worked with equipment that sparkled and hummed with crystalline energy. Her people could interface directly with computer systems, and she was slowly pulling data from the human databases. The information she found made her light flicker with distress and fear. Captain Hyunwoo, Tae-min, and the other crew members gathered around as Nara projected holographic images into the air. The pictures showed the galaxy as it had been 150,000 years ago when the Devourers first arrived. It looked very different then, with fewer stars and younger worlds. The first image showed a beautiful spiral galaxy full of life. Thousands of species lived and traded and explored together. They had art and science and philosophy. They thought they were the masters of the universe and that nothing could threaten their peaceful existence. Then the darkness came. The next images showed ships that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to bend light around themselves and left trails of nothingness in space where they passed. These were the Devourers, and they were not alive in any way that made sense. They were hunger given form, darkness that consumed everything in its path. The holographic records showed what happened to worlds the Devourers attacked. First, the ships would arrive in orbit. Then beams of dark energy would strike the surface of the planet. The energy did not destroy buildings or people. Instead, it took away their ability to be alive. Everything touched by the beams became empty shells that moved but did not think or feel. Tae-min watched the images with haunted eyes. "I remember," he said quietly. "This happened to my home colony when I was young. My family, my friends, everyone. I knew they were still there, but they were not there. The Devourers had eaten everything that made them who they were." The images showed how the infection spread. People who had been touched by the Devourers would touch others, and the emptiness would spread like a disease. Soon entire worlds were filled with hollow beings that served the hunger. They would build more ships and spread to other worlds, carrying the emptiness with them. Nara found records of the early attempts to fight the invaders. Every species in the galaxy had tried: the Zephyrians with their energy weapons, the Krathan with their massive fleets, the wise Mentax with their psychic powers. None of it worked. The Devourers consumed energy and matter equally. They turned weapons against their users and made psychic attacks backfire. The record showed a galaxy slowly dying. As more worlds fell, the remaining free species became desperate. They tried to hide on remote planets. They built massive defensive stations. They even attempted to flee to other galaxies, but the Devourers were everywhere. And they never stopped, never rested, never showed mercy. That is when humanity entered the war, Tae-min explained. We were young as a species. We had only been traveling between stars for a few thousand years. But we had something the other species did not. We had learned to be stubborn. The holographic images showed early human encounters with the Devourers. Human ships were small and primitive compared to the great vessels of older civilizations, but they fought differently. Instead of trying to match the enemy's power, they used speed and cunning. They hit fast and ran away. They rescued survivors and built hidden bases. More importantly, humans had discovered something about the Devourers that other species missed. The enemy fed on despair and fear. The more terrified their victims were, the stronger the Devourers became. But humans had learned to fight with hope instead of fear, even when everything seemed hopeless. These images showed human soldiers charging into battle while singing songs. Their ships flew into certain death while broadcasting messages of love to their families. They turned their final moments into celebrations of life instead of fears of death. This confused the Devourers, who could not feed on hope and joy. For 10 million years, humanity led the resistance against the hunger. They taught other species how to fight with light in their hearts instead of darkness. They shared their technology and their tactics. They showed the galaxy that even against impossible odds, there was always reason to keep fighting. But the cost was terrible. The holographic record showed the slow retreat as world after world fell to the enemy. Humanity's great cities were evacuated, their colonies abandoned, their fleets destroyed in desperate holding actions. The species that had numbered in the trillions was reduced to millions, then thousands, then hundreds. The final images were the hardest to watch. They showed Earth in its last days. The blue and green world that had given birth to humanity was covered in great machines that turned the planet itself into a weapon. Taimin could barely speak as he watched his homeworld prepare for its final transformation. People knew they could not win, he said finally, but they could make sure the enemy could not win either. They turned Earth into a gravity bomb that would create a prison in folded space. The Devourers would be trapped, but the explosion would destroy everything human, everything that had ever lived on Earth. The last image showed Earth's final moment. The planet collapsed into itself, creating a wound in space that pulled the Devourer fleets in after it. For a brief moment, the galaxy was filled with blinding light, then silence. The hunger was gone, trapped in a prison made from humanity's sacrifice. But as the holographic display faded, Taimin turned to face the alien crew with worry in his eyes. The prison was never meant to be permanent. He said it was designed to give the galaxy time to prepare to grow strong enough to face the threat when it returned. And I have been asleep for 100,000 years. That time is almost up. Nara's crystalline form flickered with alarm as she processed this information. She quickly began scanning the ancient databases, looking for information about the prison's structure. What she found made her light dim with fear. The gravitational barriers were weakening. The exotic matter that held the prison together was decaying. The Devourers were slowly breaking free as if summoned by their conversation. Vextar's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. "Captain," he called, "we are receiving emergency signals from across the galaxy. Dead worlds are showing signs of activity. Ships are disappearing in sectors that have been safe for millennia." Captain Hyunwoo felt ice form in his veins as he realized what this meant. The Devourers were returning, and the peaceful galaxy was completely unprepared for what was coming. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no knowledge of how to fight an enemy that consumed the very concept of life itself. Taimin stood up straighter as old military training took over. "Then we have work to do," he said. My people prepared for this day. They hid weapons and knowledge across the galaxy. They left instructions for building the tools needed to fight the hunger. But we need to move fast. The galaxy needs to remember how to war, and it needs to learn before the prison fails completely. Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of his ship, the Starbound, and looked out at the empty space around them. The Forgotten Sector was called that for a good reason. Nothing lived here. Nothing moved here. It was just cold, empty darkness that stretched on forever. The other alien species in the galaxy avoided this place. They said it was cursed or dangerous, but Hyunwoo did not believe in curses. He believed in science and exploration. His communications officer was a creature called Vextar who had 4 arms and blue skin covered in scales. Vextar suddenly made an excited noise and turned all 4 of his hands across the control panels in front of him. "Captain, there is something out there," he said. His voice was high and musical like wind chimes. "Something big. Something that should not be here." Yunwu walked over to look at the screen. The scanner showed a massive object floating in the darkness. It was huge, bigger than 10 of their ships put together. But there was something wrong. With it was not moving at all. No lights, no energy readings, nothing that would suggest life, but it was there. Solid and real in the middle of nowhere. "Take us closer," Yunwu ordered. The crew moved quickly to follow his commands. They were a mixed group of different alien species all working together under the Galactic Alliance banner. There was Nara, the science officer, who looked like a walking crystal that sparkled with inner light. There was Keth, the pilot, whose people were known for being the best flyers in the galaxy. And there were others, each bringing their own skills and knowledge to the mission. As they got closer to the mystery object, they could see it was a ship, but unlike any ship they had ever seen before. The hull was dark and scarred with what looked like battle damage. The metal was twisted and burned in places as if great fires had raged across its surface. Strange symbols were carved deep into the metal symbols that their computers could not read or understand. "The ship was ancient," Nara said as she studied her instruments. "I am reading metals and materials that are over 100,000 years old. This ship is older than any known civilization in our galaxy. But that is impossible, Captain. Most species only learned to travel between stars 50,000 years ago." Yunwu felt a chill run down his spine. 100,000 years was longer than recorded history. It was longer than any species had been exploring space. It was so long ago that most worlds had been nothing but rocks with no life at all. Yet here was proof that someone had been out here. Someone had built this massive ship and sailed it through the stars when the galaxy was young. "We need to board it," he said finally. The crew looked nervous. Boarding an ancient ship was dangerous. There could be diseases or traps or things they did not understand. But they were explorers, and this was the greatest discovery any of them might ever make. They put on their protective suits and took a small shuttle over to the alien ship. The hull was so big that their shuttle looked like a tiny insect landing on a mountain. They found what looked like an airlock, though it was built for creatures taller than most of their crew. The door was massive and covered in more of those strange symbols. Nara used her equipment to scan the door, and slowly it began to open. Ancient mechanisms that had been sleeping for thousands of centuries groaned back to life. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, but their instruments said it was safe to breathe. Inside the ship was a maze of corridors and rooms, everything built on a scale that suggested the builders were tall and strong. The walls were covered in pictures and writings that told stories they could not understand. There were images of battles in space, of great fleets fighting across the stars, of worlds burning and cities falling. But most shocking of all were the bodies. They found them in the corridors and rooms, perfectly preserved by the cold of space. They were bipedal like many species, but different. Something about their bone structure and the way they were built suggested they had been warriors. These creatures had been made for fighting. Their armor was primitive-looking compared to modern equipment, but it was clearly designed for war. Each suit was scarred and dented, showing that its wearer had seen many battles. Their weapons were simple but effective, designed to kill quickly and efficiently. These were not explorers or traders. These were soldiers. In the center of the ship they found what must have been the bridge. A massive room filled with control systems and display screens. Most of the equipment was dark and dead, but some systems still flickered with power. Nara connected her equipment to the ancient computers, and slowly data began to flow. The language was like nothing in their databases, but their computers were smart and began to piece together meanings. The ship belonged to a species that called themselves humans. They had come from a world they called Earth, a blue planet with vast oceans and green lands. They had built a great civilization that spanned many star systems. But something had gone wrong. The data spoke of a great war, a war that had lasted for 1,000 centuries, a war against an enemy so terrible that the humans called them the Devourers. The records were full of battles and defeats of worlds lost and fleets destroyed. The humans had fought desperately, but they were losing. The final entries in the ship's log were the most disturbing. They spoke of Earth itself being turned into a weapon. The entire planet had been sacrificed to trap the enemy in some kind of prison. The human survivors had scattered across the galaxy in ships like this one, hoping to rebuild their species somewhere far from the ancient battlefields. Captain Hyunwoo read the translated data with growing horror. This was not just ancient history. This was a warning. The humans had fought something so dangerous that they had been willing to destroy their own homeworld to stop it. And now their ship was here in the Forgotten Sector, carrying its warning across the centuries as they prepared to leave the ancient. Ship Vextar made one final discovery. Deep in the ship's medical section, he found a room full of sleeping pods. Most were empty and broken, but one was still active, still running on power that had lasted for 100,000 years. Inside the pod was a human still alive, still sleeping, waiting for someone to wake him up. The sleeping pod made soft humming sounds that echoed through the medical bay. Ginny, the alien archaeologist, pressed her hands against the clear cover and peered inside at the creature within. The human was tall and lean, with dark hair and skin that looked pale from his long sleep. His face was peaceful, but even in sleep there were lines around his eyes that spoke of great battles and terrible sights. "We should not wake him," Keth said nervously. His people were cautious by nature, and an ancient sleeping warrior made him very uncomfortable. "We do not know what he might do if he wakes up. He might be dangerous, he might carry diseases, he might be insane from sleeping so long." But Captain Hyunwoo was fascinated by the discovery. This human had been alive when the Great War was happening. He had seen things that were now only legends and stories. He was a living piece of history that could tell them what had really happened, all those centuries ago. Nara studied the sleeping pod with her crystal senses. "The life support systems are still working perfectly," she reported. "His body is completely healthy. The pod has been repairing any damage and keeping him young. This technology is far beyond anything we have today. Even our best medical science cannot do what this simple pod has been doing for 100,000 years." Ginny found the controls for the pod. They were covered in the same strange symbols as everything else on the ship, but her computer had learned enough of the human language to translate the basic functions. She looked at Captain Hyunwoo for permission. "Wake him up," the captain said. The crew gathered around the pod, ready for anything. The awakening process was slow and gentle. The pod gradually warmed the human body and began to supply oxygen and nutrients to wake up his sleeping brain. The human's eyes opened suddenly and he sat up fast. His hand immediately reached for his side where a weapon should have been, but found nothing. His dark eyes swept the room looking for enemies and threats. When he saw the alien crew standing around him, he froze. The human spoke in a language that was musical but sharp. He said words that sounded like commands or warnings. His voice was hoarse from the long sleep, but it carried authority. This had been a leader, someone used to giving orders in dangerous situations. "Our computers are translating," Jine said. She had learned many ancient languages in her work as an archaeologist. "He is speaking an old form of Korean mixed with other human languages. He is asking who we are and where his weapons are," slowly, carefully. Captain Hyunwoo stepped forward with his hands empty and visible. "We are friends," he said, speaking slowly so the computer could translate. "We found your ship. We woke you up. Your war is over. The fighting stopped long ago." The human's face went through many emotions: confusion, hope, fear, and then a deep sadness. He spoke again, and this time the translation was clearer. "My name is Taemin," he said. "I am a soldier of the Earth Defense Corps. I was supposed to wake up when we reached the rally point. Where are my people? Where is the fleet?" It took many hours to explain to Taemin what had happened. The human listened to everything. They told him about the current galaxy, about the peaceful alliance of species, about how long he had been sleeping. His face grew more and more sad as he learned that he might be the last of his kind. When they showed him the galaxy as it was today, with its peaceful worlds and trading routes, Taemin shook his head. "That cannot be right," he said. The devourers do not give up. They do not stop. They consume everything. If there is peace, it means they are planning something terrible. He struggled to his feet and walked to the window that looked out into space. His body was weak from the long sleep, but his eyes were sharp and alert. They were out there in the darkness between galaxies. He said quietly, "My people called them the hungry dark. They eat everything. Life, death, hope, despair, it is all food to them." Taman told them about Earth, about the blue world that had been humanity's home. He described great cities that reached toward the sky and vast farms that fed billions of people. He spoke of art and music and literature, of all the beautiful things his people had created. He told them about families and children, about love and laughter and all the things that made life worth living. But then his voice grew dark, and he told them about the war. The devourers had come from the void between galaxies, creatures of pure hunger that turned everything they touched into emptiness. They did not just kill, they consumed the very concept of life itself. Worlds they attacked became lifeless rocks that could never support life again. Humanity had fought for 1,000 centuries, Taimin said. 10 million years of constant war. We tried everything. Bigger weapons, faster ships, better armor. Nothing worked. The devourers just kept coming. They turned our own people against us, made them into hollow shells that served the hunger. The human warrior described battles that made the alien crew sick with horror. Entire star systems turned into battlefields, planets used as weapons, suns extinguished to deny the enemy resources, children trained to fight before they could walk properly. The war had consumed everything humanity was until nothing remained but the desperate need to survive. And in the end, Taimin said with tears, in his eyes, we had to choose. We could keep fighting and lose everything, or we could make the ultimate sacrifice. My people chose sacrifice. They turned Earth itself into a trap, a prison to hold the devourers until the galaxy could find another. As Taimin spoke, the alien crew began to understand the true horror of what had happened. Humanity had not just lost a war, they had voluntarily erased themselves from existence to save species they had never met, to give the galaxy a chance, to grow and develop in peace. But now Taimin was looking at their peaceful civilization with worried eyes, because he knew something they did not. The prison that held the devourers was not permanent. It had been designed to last long enough for the galaxy to prepare for their return. And that time was running out. The Kepler research station hung in space like a broken flower, its research arrays twisted and dark. When the Starbound arrived, they found other ships already there. Admiral Sung Ho's flagship, the Defender, floated nearby, along with vessels from a dozen different species. The galaxy was finally beginning to take the threat seriously. Captain Hyunwoo led a joint boarding party onto the station. The corridors were filled with the soft humming of working equipment, but no sounds of life. The research staff were at their posts, but when anyone tried to speak to them, they just stared with empty eyes. Their minds had been touched by something that left them hollow. Taemin examined the affected personnel with the careful attention of someone who had seen this before. Their bodies are healthy, he reported to the other officers, but everything that made them individuals is gone. The devourers have fed on their thoughts, their memories, their capacity to feel. They are alive, but they are no longer truly living. In the station's main laboratory, they found the source of the problem. A deep space scanner had been modified with technology that should not have existed. The equipment was clearly built using knowledge from outside normal space. It created a window that allowed the devourers to project their influence across vast distances. Dr. Kangmin, the station's lead scientist, had left detailed notes before his mind was taken. He had been studying energy patterns from the direction of the old Sol system. When he enhanced his scanners to get better readings, he had accidentally created a channel that the enemy could use to reach through their prison. Taemin studied the modified equipment with growing alarm. This is just the beginning, he told the assembled officers. The devourers are using human curiosity against us. They know we will investigate strange signals they send. They are counting on our desire to understand unknown things to give them more ways to escape. Admiral Sung Ho was a practical military leader who understood tactics and strategy. But this enemy was unlike Anything in the Alliance databases. How do we fight something that can turn our own equipment against us, he asked. How do we protect our people from an influence that travels through space itself? The human warrior walked to the center of the room and looked at each of the alien officers in turn. You fight with hope instead of fear. He said, you remember that every battle is a choice between protecting what you love and surrendering to what you hate. My people learned that the devourers grow, stronger when they face despair, but they become confused and weak when they encounter joy. Over the following weeks, Taimin worked with alien engineers and scientists to decode the locations of hidden human weapons caches his people had scattered these supplies across the galaxy, hoping that future generations would find them when the ancient enemy returned. Each cache contained not just weapons, but detailed instructions on how to fight beings that existed partially outside normal reality. The first cache they found was on a dead moon in the Zeta sector. Hidden beneath the surface were weapons that looked primitive, but were built with an understanding of exotic physics that modern science was only beginning to grasp. The human guns could fire bullets that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The armor could protect against attacks that bypassed normal matter. More importantly, they found data cores containing the complete military history of humanity's war against the Devourers. 10 million years of battle experience compressed into crystalline storage devices. These contained tactical manuals that explained how to coordinate attacks against enemies, that could influence minds, detailed studies of devourer behavior, and, most crucially, the psychological training needed to fight with hope in hopeless situations. As word spread through the galaxy, more species joined what was becoming known as the New Alliance. The Krathan brought their warrior traditions and massive fleets. The crystalline Nara's people contributed their ability to interface with any technology. The energy beings offered their knowledge of forces that existed beyond physical matter. But the most important allies were the young species who had grown up during the long peace. They had no experience with real war, but they also had no fear of impossible odds. They listened to Taimin's teachings about fighting with joy and hope, and they understood in a way that older, more experienced species sometimes could not. Training centers were established on secure worlds where alien soldiers learned human fighting techniques. They practiced battles while singing their homeworld songs. They learned to charge into danger while thinking about the people they were protecting instead of the death they might face. They discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. The Devourers responded to these preparations by increasing their attacks. Ships began disappearing in larger numbers, and entire systems went silent as the enemy's influence spread through the galaxy. But each attack also revealed more about how the ancient evil operated and how it could be fought. The most successful resistance came from mixed crews that combined human tactics with alien abilities. A Krathan warrior could provide strength and courage, while a crystal being offered precision and analysis. An energy creature could detect devourer influence, while a human soldier provided the emotional stability to fight without despair. Taimin found himself at the center of a growing military organization that spanned the galaxy. He trained officers who would train others, sharing the knowledge his people had paid for. With their extinction, he worked with scientists to adapt human weapons for modern technology, and he helped develop new strategies for a war that was fought as much in the mind as in space. But time was running short. The reports from deep space observatories showed that the gravitational prison around the old Sol system was failing faster than anyone had hoped. Massive shapes were moving in the collapsed space, and energy readings suggested that the Devourers were preparing for a full breakout. The New Alliance fleet gathered at a staging area near the Galactic core. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species armed with human weapons and trained in human tactics. It was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in over 50,000 years, but everyone knew it might not be enough. Admiral Sung Ho stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked out at the assembled fleet. "It is beautiful," he said to Taimin. "All these species working together because a human warrior taught them to fight with hope instead of fear. Your people would be proud." Taimin nodded, but his expression remained serious. "My people understood that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemy, but inspiring others to continue the fight when you are gone. Today we find out if that lesson was learned well enough to save the galaxy." The final battle was coming, and with it the test of whether hope could triumph over hunger, whether the sacrifice of one species could inspire the courage of many. The ancient war was about to begin again, and this time humanity would not stand alone. The prison that held the Devourers shattered like glass struck by lightning. Deep space observatories across the galaxy recorded the moment when the collapsed space around the old Sol system exploded outward in a wave of twisted energy ships that had been dark and hungry for 100,000 years poured through the breach, bringing with them the converted remains of civilizations that had been consumed long ago. The new Alliance fleet waited at the Nexus system, a strategic location that guarded the approaches to the galaxy's most populated core worlds. Admiral Sung Ho commanded from his flagship, while Tai Min coordinated ground forces from the ancient human ship that had become a symbol of resistance. Captain Hyun Woo served as liaison between the various species, ensuring that orders could be understood across the language barriers. The enemy fleet that emerged from the prison was vast beyond imagination. Ships the size of moons moved alongside smaller vessels that seemed to bend space around themselves. Between them flew clouds of converted beings, creatures that had once been alive but now served only hunger. Their formation stretched across light years, and their approach dimmed the stars themselves. Taemin stood on the bridge of his ancestral ship and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Around him, alien officers worked at control stations designed by human hands 100,000 years ago. The weapons systems hummed with power that bridged ancient wisdom and modern engineering. "Remember what I taught you," he said into the communications system that connected him to every ship in the fleet. "This battle is not about winning or losing. It is about choosing hope over despair, light over darkness. Remember the people you are protecting, the worlds you call home. Remember that every moment of joy you have ever experienced is worth fighting for." The battle began when the Devourer fleet opened fire with weapons that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. Beams of pure hunger reached across space, trying to drain the life from Alliance ships. But the mixed crews had learned to fight as humanity had fought. They sang songs from their homeworlds as they returned fire. They thought about their families as they charged into danger. Nara's crystalline people provided tactical coordination, their minds interfacing with ship computers to calculate firing solutions and coordinate movements. The Krathan warriors brought their legendary courage enhanced by human teachings about hope. The energy beings used their abilities to detect Devourer influence and warn their allies. The battle raged across multiple star systems as both fleets maneuvered for advantage. The Devourers tried their old tactics, sending waves of mental influence to turn Alliance crews into hollow servants. But the soldiers had been trained to recognize these attacks. They responded by focusing on positive memories and shared songs that reminded them of what they were fighting for. Ship after ship fell on both sides. The space between worlds became a graveyard filled with the wreckage of vessels from dozens of species. But for every Alliance ship that was destroyed, 2 Devourer vessels were crippled. The enemy had expected to face fear and despair. Instead, they encountered determination and joy. The turning point came when a group of converted beings attacked Captain Hyunwoo's ship directly. These had once been members of the Alliance crew who had been touched by Devourer influence in earlier encounters. They moved with mechanical precision, but their eyes were empty of everything that had made them individuals. Instead of responding with weapons, Tai Min did something unexpected. He opened communication channels and began speaking to the converted beings. He talked about their homes, their families, the dreams they had shared before they were taken. He reminded them of moments of happiness and love from their past lives. Slowly, impossibly, some of the converted beings began to remember. They were still hollow shells, but the memories of who they had been created tiny sparks of resistance within them. These sparks grew stronger as more Alliance soldiers joined Tai Min in speaking to their former friends. The Devourers had never encountered anything like this. Their power came from consuming hope and replacing it with emptiness. But when that emptiness was challenged by memories of love and joy, their control began to weaken. Some of the converted beings actually broke free from their influence and rejoined the Alliance forces. This created a chain reaction throughout the Devourer fleet. As more converted beings remembered their former selves, the enemy's coordination began. To break down, their ships began firing randomly, and their formations dissolved into chaos. The hunger that had driven them for so long was being replaced by confusion and doubt. Admiral Sung Ho seized the moment and ordered a general advance. The Alliance fleet charged forward with every weapon firing and every crew member shouting battle songs from their homeworlds. The Devourers tried to retreat, but their escape route back to the prison had been cut off by the gravitational disruption of the battle. In the final engagement, Taemin led a boarding party onto the enemy flagship. It was a twisted thing built from the remains of ships from 1,000 different species. The corridors were filled with converted beings from civilizations that had been extinct for millennia. But now they were beginning to remember who they had been. The battle for the flagship was fought hand-to-hand in corridors that shifted and changed as Devourer technology tried to adapt to the assault. But human weapons designed to exist in multiple dimensions at once cut through the enemy's defenses. Alliance soldiers who had learned to fight with hope in their hearts proved stronger than converted beings who had only emptiness. When Taemin reached the ship's core, he found the source of the Devourer's power. A massive being that existed partially outside normal space. Something that had been hunger, personified for millions of years. But now it was weakening as more and more of its converted servants remembered their former lives. The ancient enemy spoke in a voice like the dying of stars, asking why the Alliance would fight for beings they had never met, why they would sacrifice themselves for the future of species they did not even know. Taemin's answer was simple, because that is what hope means. The final battle was won not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the human concept that love and joy were stronger than hunger and despair. As the Devourer fleet dissolved into nothingness, the converted beings across the galaxy began to wake up, remembering who they had been before they were taken. In the aftermath of the victory, the new Alliance transformed from a military organization into something greater. The species that had learned to fight together decided to build together. They established colonies where humans and aliens worked side by side. They created schools where the lessons of the war would be preserved for future generations. Taemin was no longer the last of his kind. The awakened sleeper ships had yielded dozens of other human survivors, and the converted beings who had been freed included humans from colonies that had been lost millennia ago. The species that had sacrificed itself to save the galaxy was slowly being reborn. The ancient human ship was converted into a monument and museum where visitors could learn about the war and the price of peace. The corridors where Taemin had once walked alone now echoed with the voices of